A plumber lowers his drill into the classroom floor expecting to hit a rusted pipe. Instead, the concrete gives way beneath him, and for a moment, there's nothing under his boots but open air. He jumps back just in time. Dust rises in a slow cloud through the widening crack, and when it settles, everyone in the room is staring at the same thing. A jagged hole in the floor, and beneath it, a narrow staircase disappearing into complete darkness. The tuition center owner is called immediately. He stands at the edge of the hole, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand, and says the same sentence 3 times, as if repeating it might make it true. This building does not have a basement. He has owned this property for over a decade. He has seen the original blueprints. There is no basement listed anywhere. By evening, the classroom is empty of students, and the property is sealed by local authorities. What was supposed to be one afternoon of pipe repair has turned into something nobody in the building expected to deal with. The next morning, a small team is sent down the staircase to assess the space before anyone else is allowed near it. The steps are narrow, coated in decades of undisturbed dust, and the air below is thick, stale, completely untouched by ventilation for what looks like a very long time. At the bottom, the flashlight beams land on rows of rusted metal shelving, stretching further back than expected. Every shelf is packed with paper. Thousands of files, stacked and bound, some collapsing gently from age the moment they are touched. An old wall map, faded almost to illegibility, identifies the space as belonging to a regional education record office, a government archive that, according to the markings, was decommissioned during a major renovation nearly 30 years earlier. For a moment, everyone assumes the mystery is already solved. A forgotten storage room. An old records office nobody bothered to empty before the building above it was constructed. Bureaucratic carelessness, nothing more. That assumption does not survive the first afternoon. A city archivist is brought in to begin cataloging what has been found, expecting routine administrative paperwork. Instead, she finds something that makes her pause over the first file for nearly 10 minutes before opening the second. The documents are official, structured, complete, individual student folders, each containing enrollment forms, attendance logs, exam scores, even signed photographs. Real students, real classes, real years, spanning multiple decades. But when she cross-checks the names against the National Education Database, expecting simple confirmation, she finds nothing. Not one name matches. Hundreds of students, fully documented on paper, and officially, according to every existing government record, none of them ever existed. She assumes at first this is simply because the files were never digitized. Old records, sitting untouched since before digital systems existed. A reasonable explanation, and for a while, it holds. Until she reaches the third shelf. Several files end abruptly, mid-record. Not missing pages from age or damage, but a clean, deliberate stop. A student's file will run consistently for 2, sometimes 3 years, documenting normal academic progress, and then simply cease. No transfer notice, no graduation certificate, no withdrawal form, nothing marking why the record simply stops existing. She pulls 3 more files at random to check if this is isolated. It is not. Nearly 1 in every 10 folders ends the same unexplained way, as if someone, at some point, went through this archive with deliberate intention, removing only specific students from the historical record while leaving everyone else untouched. She sits back in the dim light of the basement, surrounded by shells of paper that officially should not exist, and realizes this is no longer simply an old records office. Someone chose these students. Someone decided which ones would disappear from history and which ones would remain forgotten but intact. She calls the lead investigator standing near the staircase and says only one sentence before he comes down to see for himself. I don't think this was ever meant to be found. Neither of them yet understands that the missing students are not the strangest thing this basement is about to reveal. By the second morning, the basement has been fitted with temporary lighting, cables running down the narrow staircase like veins into the dark. What was meant to be a quiet cataloging job has turned into a full forensic operation, and the mood among the small team working below has shifted from curiosity to something closer to caution. A forensic technician moves along the far wall, documenting the layout before anyone touches the shelves further, when he stops mid-step and crouches down near the base of the third row. He calls the lead investigator over without raising his voice, the way people do when they want someone close before saying something out loud. Pressed into a thin layer of dust on the concrete floor is a boot print. Clear. Defined. The tread pattern still sharp at the edges. The technician runs a quick assessment based on dust settling and surface oxidation, the same method used in dozens of abandoned property cases before this one. His estimate is not decades, not years, days. Someone stood in this exact basement only a few days ago. The investigator stares at the print for a long moment, then glances back toward the staircase, the only visible entrance into this space, sealed under a concrete classroom floor until a plumber accidentally broke through it 2 days earlier. He requests the tuition center security footage immediately, covering every camera angle for the past month. The footage arrives within the hour, and 2 officers sit through it in near silence, fast-forwarding through empty classrooms, late evening cleaning staff, students packing up after class. Nothing unusual. Nobody approaches the section of flooring where the hole was later found. Nobody lingers. Nobody even walks near it more than briefly during regular movement through the room. According to every camera in the building, nobody entered that basement, because as far as the footage shows, nobody even knew it was there. Yet the footprint remains. Fresh. Undeniable. Impossible to explain through the only entrance investigators know about. The obvious next step is also the most unsettling one. If nobody came down through the staircase, there must be another way in. Investigators pull the original city infrastructure maps for the block, cross-referencing utility access points, old maintenance corridors, anything connected to underground education archives from 30 years earlier. Most leads go nowhere. Sealed pipes, collapsed access shafts, dead ends recorded decades ago and never revisited. Then one map shows something small enough to have been overlooked in every previous survey. A narrow maintenance tunnel, marked only with an old utility code, running from a service point several streets away, curving underground in a direction that, if extended, would pass directly beneath the tuition center. A team is sent to locate the marked access point. It takes almost 2 hours of searching a quiet residential street before someone notices an old, rusted electrical cabinet fixed to the side wall of an apartment building, easily mistaken for standard utility equipment. Behind the cabinet, hidden by a loose panel that should have been welded shut decades ago, is a narrow opening leading down into darkness. The tunnel is barely wide enough for one person to move through at a time, low ceiling, old brick lining, the kind of construction typical of utility access built long before modern safety codes existed. Investigators move carefully along its length, flashlights sweeping the walls, until the passage opens directly into the far end of the basement archive. Someone has been entering this sealed, forgotten room for years, not through the building above it, but through a hidden route from several streets away that nobody without prior knowledge could have found by accident. This changes everything about how the investigators understand what they are looking at. This was never simply a forgotten archive left behind after a renovation. It was being maintained. Someone knew exactly where the space was, exactly how to access it without detection, and exactly which files mattered enough to keep returning for. The investigator walks slowly back through the tunnel, retracing the same path someone else has clearly walked many times before him, and stops just before stepping back into the basement. He looks at the shelves stretching out in front of him, at the specific files missing their final pages, at the boot print still visible in the dust nearby, and understands that whoever has been coming here was not stealing everything. They were only ever interested in certain names. The question is no longer who built this basement, or who sealed it 30 years ago. The question is who has been quietly protecting it ever since, and why those particular missing students mattered enough to keep watching over long after everyone else forgot this place existed. Back at the station, the investigator lays out every incomplete file across a long table, arranging them not by date, but by the exact point where each record stops. At first glance, there is no obvious connection. Different ages, different schools within the archives district, different years, spread across nearly 3 decades. A data analyst brought in to help organize the material spends most of the first day simply entering names, dates, and locations into a spreadsheet, expecting to find nothing more than a list. It is late in the evening, most of the team already gone, when she notices something odd while cross-referencing addresses listed on the old enrollment forms. Several of the missing students share something beyond their disappearance from the record. Their listed home addresses, once mapped, all fall within the same small neighborhood, a cluster of streets less than 2 kilometers from the tuition center itself. She widens the check, pulling public property records for those same addresses, expecting simple residential history. Instead, she finds that nearly every property connected to a missing student's file was sold within a few years after that student's record abruptly ended. At first, this seems like it could be coincidence. Families move, students transfer schools, property changes hands constantly in any city. But when she lines up the dates precisely, student record ends, followed within 1 to 3 years by a property sale in the same family's name. The pattern repeats far too consistently to dismiss. She brings this to the investigator early the next morning, spreading printed property maps beside the basement file list. He stays at it for a long time before saying the sentence that shifts the entire direction of the case. This was never really about missing students. Old land ownership maps for the neighborhood are requested next, spanning back over 30 years. What they reveal is a slow, steady pattern of redevelopment. Small residential plots gradually consolidated into larger commercial and housing developments across 3 separate decades. Digging into historical property disputes for the same addresses, investigators uncover something significant. A striking number of these land transfers were connected to inheritance claims that, at the time, faced legal challenges. Disputed ownership, missing heirs, unclear family records. Each time, the disputes were eventually resolved, and the properties changed hands smoothly, legally, without any lasting controversy. Investigators begin pulling the legal paperwork behind those resolved inheritance claims, and what they find connects everything together with unsettling precision. Several of the successful inheritance claims relied on official identity documentation, including school enrollment records, to establish family lineage and rightful ownership. Documentation that, in a number of these cases, traces directly back to the exact missing student file sitting in the basement archive. The investigator understands it now with complete clarity. These were not simply students who vanished from an old record book. Their identities, real, documented, officially enrolled at some point in an actual school archive, were later used to construct or strengthen fraudulent inheritance claims, allowing disputed land to be legally transferred to buyers who otherwise would never have secured clear ownership. The basement itself was never really about students at all. It had become something far more valuable, a hidden source of authentic, verifiable identity documents, carefully preserved and selectively accessed whenever a new land transaction required a convincing paper trail. This explains the fresh boot print in decades-old dust. This explains the hidden tunnel entrance built specifically to avoid detection from inside the tuition center. Someone had been returning to this archive for years, not to study the past, but to quietly extract exactly what they needed whenever a new property required legal legitimacy. The scale of what the investigator is now looking at expands far beyond a single missing phone case or an old forgotten room. This is not the story of one crime. It is the story of a slow, patient, decades-long operation, using real children's identities from a genuine government archive to manufacture ownership over land that never should have changed hands the way it did. And somewhere, someone still knew exactly where this archive was, exactly how to reach it, and exactly which files were valuable enough to keep protecting, long after everyone else in the city had completely forgotten this basement ever existed. With the land fraud pattern now confirmed, investigators move quickly to secure the basement completely, blocking both the staircase and the hidden tunnel entrance before anyone connected to the operation realizes how much has already been uncovered. Arrest warrants are prepared for several individuals linked to the resolved inheritance claims, men who, on paper, appear as nothing more than ordinary property buyers and legal consultants. Behind that ordinary appearance, financial records reveal a quiet, coordinated pattern spanning decades. Properties acquired through disputed inheritance claims, sold again within a few years, always at a significant profit, always with paperwork that looked completely legitimate. Just as the arrests are finalized, an unrelated structural inspection begins at the tuition center, ordered simply to determine whether the building above the basement remains safe. Engineers move through the underground space, checking support beams and load-bearing walls, when one of them notices something odd near the far end of the archive. A section of the back wall sounds hollow and tapped, inconsistent with the solid concrete surrounding it. A small opening is cut through, revealing another room, smaller than the main archive, sealed behind a wall that, based on construction material, appears to have been built at the same time as the classroom floor directly above it, nearly 30 years ago. Unlike the main archive, this room holds no student files. Instead, the shelves inside contain something far more direct: internal renovation orders, maintenance logs, signed inspection reports, official government correspondence, all dated to the same renovation period when the archive was supposedly decommissioned. As investigators read through the documents, a very different picture begins to form. These records confirm that officials overseeing the original renovation discovered this basement decades earlier, fully intact, fully documented, exactly as it exists today. They did not report it. They sealed it. The correspondence makes the reasoning uncomfortably clear. Exposing the archive at that time would have triggered a wave of legal challenges, reopening property disputes, inheritance claims, and land transfers that, by then, had already been legally finalized across the city. Rather than risk unraveling decades of property transactions built on those very documents, the decision was made quietly, administratively, and permanently. Bury the basement. Build directly over it. Let the past disappear beneath a new structure, and let time do the rest. Nobody could have predicted that a tuition center, filled every evening with ordinary students preparing for their own futures, would end up sitting directly above the exact evidence that could unravel one of the most carefully hidden land fraud operations in the city's history. Nobody could have predicted a damaged pipe, and a plumber's drill would be the thing that finally broke it open. In the months that follow, the recovered archive triggers a wave of reopened legal cases. Families who spent years fighting property disputes they never fully understood finally receive answers explaining why official records never seemed to match their own family history. Several long-settled land transactions are challenged and, in some cases, reversed entirely. The individuals responsible for exploiting the archive face serious legal consequences, but the deeper revelation, the one investigators keep returning to in their final reports, is not about any single person's guilt. It is about how easily an entire piece of history can be erased, not through destruction, but through simple, quiet concealment. A basement was never destroyed. It was never emptied. It was simply built over, hidden beneath a floor where nobody would ever think to look, precisely because everyone assumed a tuition center could never be hiding anything more serious than exam papers and study notes. By the time the full truth comes to light, one fact remains impossible to ignore. The greatest secret the city ever buried was not hidden in some remote, forgotten location. It was sitting directly beneath a classroom floor, only a few feet below where students sat every single evening, studying for a future that none of them realized was built directly above someone else's carefully erased past. If this story made you question what might be buried beneath the ordinary places you walk through every day, subscribe for more real mysteries and discoveries.